What's up, gamers? So the Warborne Above Ashes 7-day playtest just ended, so let's talk about it. So Warborne Above Ashes is a sci-fi post-apocalyptic MMO with a heavy focus on PvP. This is a game where you are a drift master. You're thrown into this dystopian world, and your goal is to join a faction and fight in an endless war against the enemy factions. Along the way, you get to join large armies, but there's also a lot of smaller scale content to do as well. I had a few people tell me that they weren't quite interested in joining this game because it seems like it's all kinds of big battles endlessly, but I found there was actually a lot of different varieties of content in the game as well. So we're gonna talk about that a little bit. Full disclosure here, I was sponsored to stream this game, so if that changes how you view my opinion on the game, then so be it. With that said, I was sponsored to stream the game for 4 hours, and you'll see after a week, I ended at 72 hours. So I definitely played it more than I had to because I really enjoyed this game. For the past 5 years, I have primarily been an Albion online content creator. And in that time, whenever I'm streaming a game that isn't Albion, I have at least a handful of people that come to my stream and say something along the lines of, "Bro, is this Albion 2? And so I always have to explain to them, no, this is a very different game. I'm playing Tetris right now. This isn't Albion 2. This game isn't trying to be Albion. With that said, this game is the closest game I've ever played to Albion before. If you're someone that's a longtime Albion player, you'll definitely recognize a lot of the systems in this game. A lot of the ways that the content shapes up and the different kinds of content you can do in this game definitely resemble content that you found in Albion. I do happen to think that this game is good enough that I could sit here and talk about it without comparing it to Albion. But I do also recognize that most people that are watching this video are probably hoping to hear the comparisons. So what I'll do in this video is I will try to explain some of the stuff that is different in this game, but I'll also try to talk about some of the stuff this game does better than Albion, in my opinion, and also some of the stuff that I think this game doesn't quite do as well as Albion as well. One of the biggest differences that you'll notice right from the start is rather than just having a you are what you wear system, where your gear denotes the skills that you can have, you also have a class-like system called the Drifters. Right now, there are already 24 different Drifters, and all Drifters have different themes. They all have different unique abilities and passives that change how the gameplay works. On top of that, you can mix the Drifters with any of the weapons and gear sets that you like, giving us a near endless amount of character designs and team compositions. On top of that, the gear that you're wearing can also get a mod. Mods are pieces that you get later in the game that add stats or different effects onto either your weapons or your gear, which makes your character different. On top of that, there's also stats that you get for leveling up that you can change. And there's also a research center that you can use to research different skills and stats for your character as well. And when you go beyond that, as the Drift Master, you have control of up to 3 Drifters. Drifters are basically different characters that you can give unique different gear to. And so in most PvP situations, if you are fighting and you die, you can respawn in the same spot as one of your other Drifters, which basically gives you up to 3 lives in different content. Essentially, if you have a team that has 100 players, and those 100 players all choose different Drifters and weapon combinations, and then as the battle goes on, your players die and respawn as different Drifters with different weapon combinations and different mods, I think it gives a chance that no 2 fights will be exactly alike. In my time playing Albion, I met a lot of players that liked the fact that the gear is what designated your skills, but I also met a lot of people that didn't enjoy the fact that Albion didn't have classes. Some players, especially MMO players, really enjoy picking a class and being that character. So I think this system is one where you can actually appease both sides and also create a lot more customization. If you are an Albion player that ends up trying Warborne, one of the first things you'll notice is how much better the new player experience is in this game. There is actually a functioning tutorial that explains the different systems and how to get into the game, as opposed to Albion that simply throws you out into the world and you have to figure it out on your own. The tutorial in Albion is so bad that if I ever had friends that wanted to play the game, I wouldn't let them just do the tutorial and jump in unless I could actually sit there in Discord and explain to them what they should be trying to do in the game. A bit of a spoiler here, but the Warborne tutorial also has a simulated PvP fight, which gets you a little bit amped up afterwards, thinking that you just killed your first player. You kind of figure it out later on that it was just a bot, but it's still pretty cool. Another thing that I think Warborne does better than Albion is make you feel like you're actually part of the world. Other than trying to conquer the map with your faction and push through zones, you also get to place a movable base called a drift mark in the world, which basically acts as your mobile home zone, where you can access a research station, crafting stations, storage, and even transport into the bazaar to buy different things. On top of the personal drift mark, your guild, which is called a warband, also gets to put a drift mark out into the world, which can be used to start different events, make battle mounts, and various other things for the game. At one point, a small group of friends and I went out during Wartimer, and we took a whole bunch of demolition robots to an enemy faction zone, and we set them up to just destroy the other team's bases while they weren't there. It was really cool to watch over time as the bases got destroyed and the shape that we could actually have on the world. When your base is destroyed in the world, what ends up happening is it gets teleported back to the starter zone. So you can move your base back out into the world again, but there is a fuel system which limits how far you can move. So if you have placed your base deep out into the world and you're gathering high tier materials and all kinds of other things and you're close to the battle, once that gets destroyed and you get sent back to your home zone, you can only move it out so far. So it really does limit it and makes it feel like you have an effect on other players in the world. I think one of the things that Warborne did really well during this testing was they limited the level that you could get each day. On the first day, there was a level cap of 20, and then I think it went up to 24, and it continued to go up every single day throughout the playtest, so that essentially most players were around the same level when they were fighting. On top of that, surprisingly, they actually released new content every single day throughout the playtest. So if you're someone that only played on the first day of the playtest, you actually probably missed out on a whole bunch of the content that they released as the playtest went on. One of the things that they released later in the playtest was something called the vein hold extraction. And I was surprised to see this even exist in the game already, but essentially the vein hold extractions were a 1v1 or a 3v3 competitive space where you sign up at the hour and you enter with other players or other teams and you fight over objectives. If you're an Albion player, I would say that this is somewhere between Hellgates and Solo Miss, but personally, I actually enjoyed this content a lot more. I heard different feedback from other players, either positive or negative towards it, but like I said, the fact that the objectives were set up on a time gate, you could see when people were going to fight over different stuff. I actually found it way more exciting than Solo Miss ever was for me. The 3v3 vein hold extractions also gave me a little bit of a taste of how the small scale PvP fights could work. Having a team of 3 and being able to switch between different drifters as you died made it really exciting to be able to fight other teams and strategize how you're going to play. So planning out the composition for the team and the different drifters that your team would bring in created a lot of opportunities for cool setups and cool gameplay. In addition to the extraction content, there are Warborne's version of a solo dungeon / corrupted dungeon. When Albion first released solo dungeons, I actually liked them a lot because you could go around diving enemy solo dungeons. So effectively, you could find other players in there and kill them and take their boss. But eventually over time, Albion made solo dungeons safer and the door closes, so you can't do that anymore. Warborne came up with a pretty novel solution to this problem. Rather than having solo dungeons and corrupted dungeons be separate, they combined them. When you go into the dungeon, you can choose to either expose your dungeon or leave it closed. If you leave it closed, no one can jump in there and attack you. But if you expose it, even if no one attacks you, you end up getting twice the amount of loot. The players that are looking for fights or looking for better rewards will expose them so that other people can jump in, and players that are just looking for safe content to get easy rewards will not expose them and just stay safe. I thought this was an easy way for them to tackle the idea of people that just wanted to do safe PvE content versus PvP content. One thing to note in Warborne is there is no safe zones. No zones in the game other than the bazaar, the marketplace, is considered a safe zone. So even if you're in a starter zone, there is opportunity for other players to come there. There are heavy penalties if you are to attack an enemy player in their starter zone, so it is very much discouraged, but there's no safe zones in Warborne. One of the things that makes Warborne PvP more accessible than Albion is the fact that it isn't technically full loot. When you die, you drop half of your inventory, so that might be loot that you picked up, random resources, whatever, and you drop one random piece of gear from your gear set. So that means if you have a weapon, a armor piece, a helmet, and shoes, you might drop your shoes. The next time you might drop your helmet. If you are someone that's going to respawn with multiple drifters, you will drop one piece of gear from each of them. What ends up happening in these situations is you don't feel quite as punished if you're to die. So you end up having a lot more people that are more willing to engage in PvP because it doesn't feel like you're set back if you die. Personally, I love high risk, high reward PvP, so I thought this system would be annoying for me, but I actually found myself enjoying it. When I went out to PvP, it still felt good to kill people because I was still getting loot from them. I was still actually gaining experience, so my character was getting stronger just from fighting other players. And I wasn't too concerned if I died because I could just go right back out with only replacing one piece of gear. Gear does tend to go up in price quite a bit. At higher levels, one weapon might cost you 1 million of the Starfall currency, whereas at lower levels, 1 million might cover 5 or 6 sets of gear. So it is kind of pricey to take out really expensive gear, and you do have to kind of keep that in mind when you're fighting groups. A couple nice quality of life things that Warborne has is there's a follow feature. So what that means is if you're going out with a big Zerg or you're going out with a group of friends, you have to travel across a few zones, you can just click follow on the party leader and they can ride you all the way out to the fight. Again, if you're an Albion player and someone that regularly did ZVZ content, I'm sure you can remember how annoying it was to have to ride on your horse for up to 30 minutes just to get a fight, and sometimes you didn't even get a fight. So the fact that you could just follow in this game as opposed to having to click your mouse to run around the map, it actually made it a lot easier to do. Beyond that, there is even an item that you can unlock that allows you to teleport team members to you. So if you're someone that's coming late to the ZVZ or coming late to whatever content they're doing, your friend can drop a teleporter and teleport you right into the fight. So you don't have to worry about showing up late anymore. One of the things that I've always found frustrating about large ZVZ battles in Albion is the performance. How many times have I gone to a ZVZ and because too many players were using their abilities at the same time, my game simply turns into a slideshow. I logged into Albion this week and went to a ZVZ, and in a castle fight, I dropped to about 13 FPS at one point. Whereas in Warborne, when I was in a fight with twice as many people, with my game settings at absolutely maxed, I never went under 40 FPS as far as I can tell. Now, game performance is going to be based on a lot of different issues. It could be based on your PC, it could be based on your ping, a bunch of other stuff that I'm not really qualified to talk about, but at least for me, it felt like in large-scale fights, my performance was much better in Warborne than it ever was in Albion. I felt like I still had the ability to make decisions on what skills to use and where to position, even though the fight got really large. Another thing that would often hold me back from going to a ZVZ was really just the time that you had to invest. If you're going to an Albion ZVZ, you would often have to sit on an island for 30 minutes while your guild came up with a comp, assigned roles to everyone. After that, you might have to run out to a zone that could be 30 minutes, could be 45 minutes away. Sometimes when you got out to that zone, you wouldn't even have an enemy to fight, so all that time would be wasted. In Warborne, due to the faction system, big fights were a lot more accessible. I could look at the map and see that a fight was going on, and I could just ride out there by myself. Obviously, I do understand that if players are just picking whatever build they want to play and showing up to a big fight, the idea of fighting over large, important objectives gets a little bit harder without having communication and comp set up. But for me, at least, I much preferred the accessibility of large-scale fights in Warborne over the long, arduous process of ZVZs in Albion. Now, while I do like doing large-scale ZVZ content, it isn't my only interest. I like a PvP game where I can do a variety of different stuff and have a lot of different content to do throughout the day. I was worried with Warborne when I saw the trailers because it seemed to just be advertising all of the large-scale things you can fight over. I was pleasantly surprised when I jumped into the game and found a whole bunch of smaller scale and even solo stuff that you can do in your time in Warborne. Some of the most fun I had during the 7-day test was just going with a small group out into the enemy faction zone and taking a turret to dismount people and then ganking them and killing them right in front of their own bases. I would really encourage other people out there that were dissuaded about playing the game based on the fact that it seems to be just large ZVZs nonstop to give it a try, because I was super surprised to see how much content this game already has. As a content creator, I end up playing a lot of different games, and this is by far the most fleshed out playtest I've ever seen. I was expecting a shell of what we got. I was expecting to be able to jump into ZVZ content. I was expecting to play maybe 4 or 5 different classes, maybe a few different weapons. But instead, what they did was gave us 24 different classes to try. They gave us a huge array of weapons to choose from. They gave us a whole bunch of different content to sink our teeth into. So I was really shocked just to see how much this game already has with the state that it's in. Now, Warborne, of course, isn't a perfect game. No game out there is perfect. especially for everyone. But for a game that's in what we're told is a pre-alpha playtest, it definitely exceeded my expectations. Some of what I saw personally as problems in Warborne were, of course, balance issues. Some of the classes and weapons definitely seemed a lot stronger than others. One of those being the Shadow Seer, which was a class that could throw out these balls that basically one-shot people. Because you could mix and match classes and weapons, what it meant was you could sometimes have a healer that while he has full healing abilities from his weapon, he could still one-shot someone just because of his class. There were other balance issues as well. It seemed like tanks weren't quite tanky enough. It did seem like ranged DPS was a little bit stronger than melee DPS, and things just seemed a little bit out of whack. But even in this week playtest, we saw Warborne try to balance certain things to make the playtest better throughout. Another issue that I noticed in the game was that you were able to add defenses to your drift marks, your bases out in the open world. So what ended up happening was in certain zones, drift marks would be stacked and they would have laser defenses all around them. So trying to navigate zones and enemy factions was nearly impossible without going through these lasers that constantly just dismounted you and killed you. Another thing that I noticed that didn't seem quite finished was the gathering. Going out to gather didn't seem like a viable activity because gathering nodes were very scarce. The other thing that I didn't like about gathering is that it didn't seem as though you could actually level up your gathering by doing the task. Instead, you had to research and improve your gathering skill before you went out. The actual act of gathering didn't really feel like it was benefiting your character. On the topic of gathering, one thing I really did like though, is that when you went out to gather, you actually gathered 2 different resources. One of the resources was for you to help you craft things in your base, but the other resource you could refine and take to your guild base, and your guild could use it to do various activities. I thought it was a really cool way that the game made it so that people who were going out gathering were also benefiting their guild. If you were to follow Albion, it always seemed like it was really strange to have someone that was a full-time gatherer in a guild, because unless they were giving those resources to the guild, what were they benefiting the guild by doing? The last negative I'll say is that with having so much different types of content in the game already, it seemed like some of the content wasn't quite finished or didn't make sense. For example, this thing I found on the last day of playtesting was a dungeon that spawned during wartime only, and somehow these dungeons seem to connect the bases that people are fighting over for wartime. And if you are to go in the center of these dungeons, there's nothing. I have no idea what these dungeons are for. Even during wartime, I don't see why any groups would go in here. So I think it's just unfinished content. So there's definitely a few things that don't quite have the finishing touches on them, but I think that is to be expected again during an early playtest. Now, I happen to consider it a pretty good sign if at the end of a week playtest, most of the complaints and issues players have are based on balance changes that they'd like to see, as opposed to game-breaking bugs or the game not working in one way or the other. With that said, I do think there are 3 things that could cause this game to not find success whatsoever. In order from least serious to most serious, the first issue that I think could stall this game would be the seasonal system. Warborne has announced that it will operate on a seasonal system where after either a 1-month or a 2-month season, the world will reset. They haven't exactly confirmed what will carry over from one season to another, so we are still kind of guessing what your player will get as they start the next season. Now, I do think the seasonal approach makes a lot of sense in a game like this, but I do think it'll scare away some of the MMO players out there if they find that by the end of the season, all that work was for nothing. The next big hurdle I think Warborne has is player acquisition. This is a game that absolutely requires a lot of people to play for it to be any fun at all. Right now, from watching the playtest, 95% of the players in the game are either current or old retired Albion players, and I really don't think a new game can subsist just off of old Albion players. I think Warborne has to do some marketing. I think they need to tap into some games and some markets and some communities out there so that we can get a rich, full player base so this game actually sees its full potential. And the last one, this is the big one, and you've probably been thinking about it this whole time I've been talking. The thing that could absolutely brick this game is monetization. If Warborne is to take an aggressive pay-to-win business model, it'll be something that turns off the player base and stops a lot of people from even trying the game in the first place. Now, in a question and answer, Warborne did address this. Their answer is, we are a free-to-play game and we're still considering what to offer in the in-game store. Most likely, it will include limited resources, subscriptions, and cosmetic items. What do you think would work best? Now, personally, in an ideal world, what I would like to see are battle passes, a generic battle pass system that maybe gives you more experience and maybe gives you some cosmetic items as you level up throughout the season, and lots of cosmetic. I think with the drifter system, it would be easy for them to sell cosmetics for each individual drifter. On top of that, having your weapons have their own individual cosmetics, maybe even gear having cosmetics could work as well. While they're at it, they could also sell cosmetics for things like your base, your drift mark, maybe your guild drift mark, maybe any of the mounts that you use, maybe even your miner that you put out in the game. I would love to see them sell cosmetics for literally everything in this game. It should be pretty obvious, but I would love to see them get nice and rich off of this game, but also not hurt the actual player experience by over monetizing the game. At the end of the day, I think this is the one big thing that could kill the game. So I'm really hoping they're smart about this. And that's about it. That wraps up most of my thoughts. I'll answer the big question though. Do I think Warborne is the Albion killer? Maybe. I think it's possible. I do think there's a world where the players of Albion that actively want to engage in fun, high risk, high reward PvP will end up flocking to Warborne just because of the changes and the setup that they have in the game. I know a lot of the people that I've played with over the years have moved on from Albion just because it doesn't seem as though Albion is making changes that are beneficial for the PvP players of the game. This likely isn't going to be something that's extremely detrimental to Albion as a core. Albion for quite some time now seems to be favoring the mobile market as opposed to trying to appease the hardcore PvP players. So this shouldn't be something that necessarily hurts Albion, but if Warborne is successful, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the people that used to enjoy PvP content in Albion instead spend more of their time playing Warborne. I personally think this game is great. I'm really looking forward to the month-long test they told us is coming in April. If we get a date on that soon so we can jump into that playtest, I'm really just itching to play this game more. Thanks for watching the video. If you're someone that tried out the playtest of Warborne, leave a comment, let me know what you thought about the game. If you're someone that's thinking about trying it during the next playtest, let me know as well. Hopefully this won't be the last Warborne video that I put out.